So one more thing to talk about was a friend of the show. I met George Gammon once in Miami last year. I'd love to have him on. George, if you're listening, that's an invite. Please contact us. We'll be reaching out to you. But I know, Dylan, you have a couple of clips from one of his recent shows that you wanted to share. So let's watch the first one. We'll talk about it.
Let's go right over to the BIS. And I think we might have used this chart the other day, but it's definitely worth going back to again. And you can see the dollar share of official foreign exchange reserves. So this is basically on balance sheets of central banks and whatnot. Has definitely gone down 100%. Well, it hasn't gone down by 100%, but I'm saying it's definitely gone down to the point now where it's under 60%. So if you just look at this chart, you say, my gosh, that is really bad. Not good. Maybe China has killed the dollar. But then you get into the nuance. Very important. Devil's in the details, right? And what we want to do first is we want to look at the dollar decline, but then we also want to look at the dollar's nearest competitors. Euro, call it, I don't know if you want to throw in the pound there, but call it the euro yen. So during this time frame, when we've seen this decline of dollars being held in the reserve accounts of these official entities, mostly central banks here, have we seen the dollar's two main competitors go up? Not really. The yen slightly, but that really wouldn't account for this decline in USD. Euro, definitely not. Euro's actually gone down as well on net. British pound, So it is all about the other. And you could say, okay, George, well, that's got to be the yuan. See, the yuan, look at what Russia's doing. Saudi Arabia, India, they're all doing it. But then we look at the actual data and we see that this other isn't just a result of the Chinese yuan. It's actually a result of these central banks holding a lot of these other smaller, quote unquote, reserve currencies. Probably not the right name, but all of these other currencies on their balance sheet as reserves. I think that's a better way of saying it. Like which currencies? Okay. Well, number one, Australian dollar, Canadian dollar, and yes, the yuan, and the Swiss franc. I also saw another report stating that a large portion of this is from.
Okay. So Dylan, unpack that for us a little bit.
Yeah. So a couple of things. There's the high level. Just George does a really good job of looking into the numbers and sharing numbers to back up his claims and perspectives and to support his analysis. So I think that's a good idea there to kind of cut through some of the hysteria and the headlines of the dollar's dying and really look at how is it dying, where does it stand compared to his competitors there. And I like how he questions it. Is like, okay, well, it's declining. Yes, that's happening. Then what are its competitors doing, and how he breaks down what the largest competitor is at other, and then gives some reasons why that may be going up as well. So I think it's a really good perspective to consider when you see these headlines. And he's also a good resource to check out if you're interested in this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think he's great. He does a lot of he's pretty much self-educated on his economic background. He's done a fantastic job with that. So that was the reserves at the central banks, right? And the currencies that they're holding.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would look, let's watch the other segment, and that's, I have some comments on that. So Patrick, can you throw up the other segment here? Or actually that's for me, but you can play it.
Yeah. And this one where he kind of talks about the size of the number of dollars in circulation versus some of the BRICS dollars or whatever BRICS currency in circulation.
Percentage of that other category, it's right here, that 10% that's increasing, it would be a much smaller percentage even of that other category. And then I want to point out the global GDP right now is about 104 trillion. And as most of you guys probably saw that interview I just did with Jeff Snyder, we talked about, okay, how much, if the global GDP is 104 trillion, how many dollars are actually on the balance sheets of all these entities if you just combined all of the balance sheets in the world into one? So the global balance sheet How many dollars are actually there?
Mm.
And his guess was the same as mine, and that was somewhere north of $100 trillion. So it is absolutely true that the yuan is taking a bigger and bigger share, and it's happening very quickly. But that share has gone up to 336 billion with a B in a global economy of 104 trillion, where there's literally over $100 trillion on global balance sheets. So is this accelerating? Absolutely. Is it a drop in the bucket? Absolutely. So we should watch this, and this let me be very clear, this absolutely illustrates this push towards de-dollarization globally, absolutely illustrates the dollar is losing reserve currency status. There's no doubt about that. But again, my point is that this is a process that happens over decades. It doesn't happen over days, weeks, months, or years.
Interesting perspective. Dylan, I assume you agree with his perspective on all that?
I think it's a perspective. I don't know if I know enough to fully agree or disagree with that. It could be like one of those situations where it's gradually then suddenly, and that would be a cataclysmic suddenly if the numbers and scale of the size of the competing currencies is true. I mean, over 100 trillion compared to 330 billion, like that's 1/3% of relative to the total number of dollars out there. And so if the dollars were to shrink to something half that size or half of 100 trillion, that's massive, right? That's an extremely large amount of money shifting. And it seems like it'd be a cataclysmic thing. So for that to happen overnight, like that's scary, for something like that to happen overnight. I don't know who would want that to happen overnight, because I don't know who would be able to handle that.
Well, I have a counterpoint to that, and I'll give you a choice, Patrick. You want me to go with mine, or you want to go next?
Go ahead.
All right. So when you're looking at the balance sheets of the central banks, which is what George is doing, which is a great theory, it's a great thesis to go at, but understand what central banks also hold. They hold gold, and they also hold a bunch of T-bills. So they have exposure to precious metals, and they already have exposure to a ton of dollars already. So it would make sense to me that they would hold alternative currencies to kind of hedge themselves and spread out their risk. So it doesn't surprise me that, but with so many dollars on their T-bills already, and all the treasuries that they have, and their credit default swaps, and their mortgage-backed security, they have all these exposures to these other vehicles, and those are on the balance sheet too. Because those are on the balance sheet and they're reflected, and they may not be the right numbers, but they're there and they are much bigger. But the usage of the currencies around the globe to settle between nations is not the same as looking at the central bank balance sheets, because those treasury bills are kind of held in the century. They're not the exchange mechanism. So that's why that would be my argument to saying that, like saying it's a drop in the bucket is not accurate, because of all the other gold and all the treasury bills that are out there. They're also in those balance sheets too. Patrick?
I think it's a little bit more complicated than we'd like to give ourselves credit for. Because as we talk about numbers of 300 billion or 100 trillion, let's talk about the numbers that deal in the quadrillions. So I can think that I could see this as a drop in the bucket, right? But this drop is the bet that everyone is hinging on. So I think that the impact of what happens of this drop in the bucket has ramifications that could be in the quadrillions in derivatives.
Yeah, and that's the sleepy giant that's out there, right? That's and no one knows exactly how many there are, but
Yeah.
I think it was I'm trying to find it while we're talking now, that the number of assets out there, I think it was 900 trillion, and it showed a chart compared to I got it 1 second. Yeah. It's and of course I'm lost in the windows, but it's $900 trillion worth of assets compared to everything else. So here we go. So this shows the relative scale of Bitcoin, and I'm sorry, there we go. So Bitcoin is $400 billion compared to 900 global asset value of 900 trillion. And these numbers are astronomical. It's very hard for people to understand. And quadrillion is just beyond, it's the next thing after trillion. So the entire global asset value from Bitcoin, gold, art, collectibles, real estate, equities and bonds, and what they call money, which is cash. It's just under a quadrillion dollars. But what's not represented here is the derivatives, which are bets on top of bets. Like if you own an equity, like a derivative would be like, oh, well, it's kind of like a tracking stock. If you're rather owning the entire S&P 500, you could own QQQ, which I think is the right tracking stock. I'm not sure. That might be NASDAQ.
And let's go QQQ.
Yeah. So if you go QQQ and have that, you own QQQ, which is not owning a real stock. It's a tracking stock that tracks one of those major indices. But you don't own the stocks that are in the index. So instead of buying 500 stocks, you buy this one tracking stock, which has no real equity behind it, but it mirrors how that performs. That's a derivative. It's kind of like when you buy Bitcoin, but can't remove it off of the exchange, or it's just a tracking stock. It's like it goes up and down, sure, but can you actually get the Bitcoin off of there? Like you don't have the Bitcoin. That's why we talk about self-custody when we get to crypto. You don't have those assets. You don't have the gold. You have to have the gold, the silver, the Bitcoin in your physical control and under your self-control so that someone else can't get it. And the rehypothecation factors that are out there can't, get ugly like what Lynette Zhang talks about. And we'll talk about the precious metals shortly too, but 86,000 claims on every ounce of gold that's out there. So it's very, very complicated, and that's done on purpose because it's a huge puzzle, and they don't want you to understand how the banking system works. They don't want you to understand what a credit default swap or a mortgage-backed security is because, people's eyes roll back in their head when they hear these complicated things, so they don't want to know because I work hard. I want to come home and have a nice experience with my family and not have to worry about financial issues every single week, which is what's happening now.